Hey everybody, Charles for HumbleMechanic.com. Today, I'm going to be taking your questions on 1.8 turbos, braking stuff, throttle body issues, and more. This is episode 149 of the Humble Mechanic Podcast. All right, to get a question on a show like this, email me, charles@humblemechanic.com. Be sure to put question for Charles in the subject, as well as ask your question. Enter button a couple of times, then give me the details. That helps me actually answer the question that you want answered, instead of having to dig through an entire paragraph to figure out what you're trying to figure out. All right, before we get into the show, let's talk about the sponsor of the day, which is CRP Automotive. CRP deals in a ton of OE maintenance and repair parts, timing belt kits, suspension components, and even fluids. In fact, they make the factory DSG fluid for Volkswagen and Audi. So check them out at crpautomotive.com. All right, with all that wrapped up, let's get into the questions. First one comes from Brian. I'm a proud owner of a B5.5 Passat 2002 1.8 turbo. I've heard these cars have some design flaws and are money pits, but I really love the car and I'm trying my best to take care of it. Do I have any tips specifically for this model on how to keep it healthy? Brian, great question. So this is very similar to the car that I drive. Number one, most important thing. Change the oil. That is like the Achilles heel of this vehicle. People not changing the oil on time, not using the correct oil. We want to use a 540. You can go with a 530, full synthetic. I change my oil every 4,000 miles. The interval is technically every 5, but I like to build a little insurance in there and do it every 4. In addition to that, you want to make sure you keep a close eye on a lot of different things. In fact, I shot a video on the top 5 failures of that vehicle. Check that video out. I'll be sure to link it down in the description. That'll give you some of the ideas that are really common failure points. In addition to the oil thing, what we typically see is people not fixing things when they come up. So we wait on fixing a leaking valve cover. That causes a coolant leak. Now we still got to fix the oil leak, and we got a coolant leak on top of it. Waiting too long to get the CV boots repaired. Now we have an axle that's clicking, so it's going to cost us quite a bit more. So I highly recommend checking out that video, but if there was one thing I would say you absolutely need to do is keep your oil changed. That is going to be the key. All right, next one comes from James. How do I feel about repair technicians doing oil changes, whether it's slow or slam busy with repair work? James, unfortunately, my fellow technicians, whether you consider yourself a diagnostic tech or a repair tech or whatever your specialty that you think that you have or you go by, oil changes are part of the job. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't like doing oil changes. If I didn't have to do an oil change, especially on like a production line, like at a dealership, I'd be cool with that. But I also realize that's a very important part of maintaining cars, right? The last question I just answered was on oil changes. So unfortunately, it's part of the job. Now, is this a job better left to a service express? Maybe. That really all depends on your dealership dynamic and what's going on. I will tell you that most dealerships price oil changes where they really don't make any money, or they might make $1 an oil change. Maybe, right? Maybe. The profit margins are stupid low on things like oil changes because it's meant to get people in the building and then we go from there. So to pay a highline technician or a high technician, on the pay scale, an oil change rate is silly, which is why some dealerships have a really dumb thing where they pay different dollar amounts to technicians for maintenance. But I don't love it, unfortunately, or fortunately, if that's your thing. It's going to be part of the job. I'd hate to have to give the oil change up on like a 20K service or something like that because I wasn't allowed to do the oil change. Oh, and James actually had one more question that I'm going to answer really quick. What are my thoughts on a really good technician breaking something every now and then, accidentally or out of stupidity, and the boss paying for it? Is it okay or should the tech pay no matter what? I actually like the boss paying for it, right? Stuff's going to break. Sometimes it's the tech's fault. Sometimes it's the car's fault. Like you said, sometimes it's just stupid. Sometimes the planets align in a perfectly terrible way and things get broken. If it's an accident or something like that, I think the shop should pay for it. I consider that sort of part of doing business. Now, if it is flagrant neglect, like the tech whips the car into the shop, punches a hole in the tire hitting the lift, I wouldn't probably make him pay for that one. But let's say the next car he pulls in pops the tire. Maybe. Next car pulls in, pops a tire. Dude's buying 2 tires. That's just how it is. You know, there's a point, a threshold that you meet where it just makes sense for the technician to start paying for these parts. Because sometimes, my fellow technicians, when you make mistakes and you keep making them over and over again, or you're lazy about something and you don't want to do it, that is clearly part of your job. The only way to get through to some people is to hurt them in the wallet. I don't love the idea of it. I would prefer not to do it, but sometimes that's the only thing that gets guys' attention. So neglectful and flagrant and consistent, yeah, tech should pay for it. Otherwise, unfortunately, it's part of doing business. All right, next up, I have a 2009 CC with an intermittent throttle body related fault. P0221 and I'm guessing 0121. I had the throttle body replaced, and 3 weeks later, the same issue. So I'm considering the foot pedal or rewiring the throttle body connection to the ECM. What would you recommend? I don't like being stranded or having no RPM past 2,800. Peace, DLR. Cool initials, DLR, right? So this is actually a really common issue on the TSI. There's a technical service bulletin for that. It is to rewire the throttle body. 6 wires, about this long, and then we move shorter till the shortest one is about maybe that long. Really common. I've seen that fix it a lot. I've seen that not fix it at times, and us either have to go all the way back to the ECM, or really what's better at that point. If you got to go all the way back, you're really better off in most cases putting an engine harness in it. They're not that expensive. They're pretty easy to do, and you know you're getting everything. It's not always just going, 6 wires back to the ECM. We have to consider what other components are spliced into it and things like that. So if you have to go back any further than this much, like the tech bulletin says, I would put a body harness in it. Now, if you're a wiring expert and you have the diagram and you know exactly what you're doing, do your 6 wires, pay attention to your splices, and rock and roll. But for most of us, it's going to be more efficient and more affordable overall to just go ahead and put the entire engine room harness. I will add one other thing. Make sure that your battery voltage is good. I've had bad batteries cause this kind of issue, and they get really upset. These TSIs will actually also store throttle pedal faults for issues with the throttle body, so keep that in mind. Every single one of these I've seen has pretty much been a throttle body issue. I think I've replaced 1 or 2 pedal issues, but they are very, very rare. All right, next one comes from Gary. Gary bought a 2016 Touareg with 4,000 miles. Looks like the dealership he bought it from was not a VW dealership, and they overfilled it with oil, according to the screen and the MFI. He drained a little oil out to set the level right, but now it's leaking oil. He had the local VW dealership do an oil change and put a new crush gasket in it, but now it's still leaking on his garage floor. Of course, he moved the skid plates, tried to clean it, and it didn't go very well. So what does he do? The vehicle's still under warranty, obviously, but he wants to know basically if the Touareg has PCV issues. So Gary bought a Touareg. The Touareg was overfilled with oil, loosened the drain plug. Now it won't stop leaking. Gary, this all depends on where it's leaking from. Those TDIs, Touaregs, can be very, very challenging to get sealed properly. If you don't use the right crush washer and torque that properly, it's very, very common to have oil leaks on this car. We've seen it on Touaregs, we've seen it on Q7s a bunch of times. In fact, a lot of the guys are starting to extract the oil out of the dipstick, which I really think is the way that one's meant to be done, not necessarily from the drain plug. I would make sure that it has the right crush washer and the right drain plug in it before I went to replacing anything. But you can bring it to the dealership and see what they say. I don't think on a car that holds that much oil, overfilling it by about a quart is really going to cause any damage, but it might. This has variable oil pressure switches in the engine, so maybe it will. My guess is that we're just having a problem with the crush washer still leaking. So what you need to do is you need to figure out where it's leaking from. Is it leaking from the drain plug? Is it leaking from higher up? Is it leaking from a seal on the top end of the engine? Without knowing that, you're just going to be shooting dice at the problem. So we need to find out where the oil leak's coming from and really go from there. You can take it into the dealership and have them diagnose it. You can put oil dye in it, and that will help. It doesn't help as much on the diesels because that oil gets so black, whereas a gas engine, the oil stays a little cleaner for longer. But you can try adding oil dye and hopefully trace where that oil leak's coming from, because like you said, maybe we have an issue, or maybe we simply just have a drain plug that is not wanting to cooperate. All right, got time for one more. This one comes from Chris. I have an 06 Jetta 2.0 FSI. I've replaced the brake booster pump to the newer model, which has a different position for the O-ring seal, in hopes that the new seal position would fix the oil leak. However, I still have oil leaking in the area below the brake booster pump. It's hard to tell exactly where it's coming from because it seems to spray everywhere and I don't have a mirror. And it's not a whole lot of oil, however, oil does seem to be building up on the wiring harness attached to the booster pump. Did you have any videos that mention this already? Do you know what is a typical reason for the leak? It's pretty common, it seems. Chris, so yeah, I have had on the FSI, there is a brake booster vacuum pump bolted to the side, 3 bolts, small O-ring, and sometimes they leak. Now, this part has been updated. I don't recall if there's 2 different covers or now just 1 cover and 1 pump, but there are different pumps. I'm also gonna shoot this question over to Paul from Shop DAP, see if he can get like the part situation worked out for us, because I just don't know.
All right, so you have an FSI that has an oil leak. For anybody who's not familiar with what he was referring to, the FSI engines had some revisions to the brake vacuum pump that is mechanically driven, that mounts to the cylinder head. The biggest revision he's referring to is earlier versions had different seal placement locations. So the best way to envision it would be if you were to, it mounts to the timing cover. And so there's a cylinder it mounts into. And so in the old style, the seal was mounted and it would actually sit into the cylinder. And the newer style pumps actually have a seal that basically sits against the face. So my first thought is one of 2 things. Either one, you don't have the pump centered and it's allowing oil past that in some way, or 2, you have an issue with the timing cover itself, which is actually leaking. So you'll definitely need to track down specifically where it's coming from, but I would say the timing cover would be the next place. Obviously, that's a little bit more of a challenge, but the timing cover is what actually the cylinder, the brake vacuum pump mounts to, and actually would need to be removed. And they have a cover on that that's like a metal gasket that actually goes between that timing cover and the cylinder head itself. So I would say, to me, it seems like it's probably one or the other, but you'll have to definitely track down where that's coming from. My advice with any leak is always, and I'm sure Charles is going to be the same, is clean it off. Get either brake cleaner or some sort of cleaner like that. Clean it off to the best of your ability, and then once you've done that, run it and see where the leak is coming from. It'll help you actually identify specifically where your leak is at.
And finally, remember that oil leaks down, not up. So you want to start at the top, all the way at the top, and then work your way down, and hopefully that'll point you in the right direction. Make sure, though, that vacuum pump is sealed up. Normally, you can see it dripping down and down the cover when it's the vacuum pump. If you don't see any on the bottom of the cover or much on the bottom of the cover, it's very likely that it's either the valve cover or it could be that metal gasket around the vacuum pump. So, Chris, man, good luck to you, and I hope that helps you out. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. Any questions, comments, you know what to do. Hey, if you like the video, throw it a thumbs up on YouTube. I always appreciate that. You can also subscribe on YouTube or on the blog at humblemechanic.com. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the blog, and of course, on Snapchat. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Oh, by the way, if you are watching this on Monday, when the video comes out, I will be in Ohio at a Ferrari event, which I'm super pumped about. So you're kind of watching this from the past into the future, which means the drink of the day is not coffee like it is on most Sunday mornings. Nice, crisp, tall, cold gin and tonic.